Good morning to everyone. I think we can get started. So welcome to this fourth annual meeting of the Dynamic Coalition on Network Neutrality. Together we will discuss today some very critical issues, not only the implementation and exceptions to net neutrality and various frameworks that have been adopted so far, but also a very prominent issue that is zero rating practices. The first segment of the session will be dedicated to the discussion of network neutrality implementations and exception, and we will have Arnold Storm from a Norwegian telecommunications regulator. Then we'll have Rosalind Layton from Aalborg University, Carlos Brito from R3D here in Mexico. Then in the second segment we will have a discussion on zero rating. I would introduce with a couple of remarks, and we'll have Robert Pepper from Facebook that we are waiting for. Tommy Wailori also that is from Paradigm Initiative and should arrive in a couple of minutes. And obviously, last but not least, Javier Palero. And the session will be introduced by Mr. Guy Berger, that is Director from Freedom of Expression at UNESCO, that has made us the great honor of being our keynote speaker. And one other important element is that many of the themes that we are going to discuss today are in this fourth annual report of the Dynamic Coalition on Net Neutrality. There are 3 copies around. You can take them. There is a box full of copies somewhere in this room, there. And the report is also already accessible online. If you go on internet-governance.fgv.br, you will be able to download any copy. So without losing any further time, I would like to ask to Mr. Guy Berger to introduce our session, speaking to us about the great work that UNESCO is doing on this topic. Maybe you can use this. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Luca, for inviting me, and congratulations to the Dynamic Coalition for this really excellent work that you have been doing. You may know that UNESCO, which I work for, has 195 member states. So as you can see from the work here, it's very difficult to get agreement amongst the participants here. Can you imagine 195 states trying to agree a position on net neutrality? Well, there is no position, so you can therefore be thankful I am not able to speak for very long, because there is no UNESCO position on net neutrality. Except I would say a few things. One is that UNESCO, as a political organization, is not fundamentalist in this regard. Most likely, if you were to ask the member states, they would say net neutrality is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself, bearing in mind, of course, that net neutrality as a means can have unintended ends as well, or violations of net neutrality can have unintended ends. The second point I would like to say, though, is that UNESCO does have a conceptualization of the internet, which I think can be useful for providing a bigger picture in which to discuss and assess some of the debates around net neutrality. So in that regard, I would just tell you a little historical experience. At the time of the Snowden revelations, UNESCO had a big debate about the implications for privacy, and then it also expanded to freedom of expression, ethics on the internet, and access on the internet. And as happens in the UN system, when there's a big complex issue, instead of taking a decision, the secretariat, like me, you have to do a study. So we did a very big study over 18 months with a lot of consultation. I'm sure many people here contributed to the study. The study came out as this booklet here called Keystones to Foster Knowledge Societies. And if any of you have received this publication, this list of UNESCO publications on the internet, you'll see there's a summary there and other ones. So what's interesting about this study that we did, it discussed these issues of access to information, freedom of expression, privacy, ethics. And it did touch on the question of net neutrality. But at the time, when the research was done, about 2014, the debate around net neutrality was particularly as regards what had been happening in the US about the debate about fast lanes and two-sided markets for payment and so on. And this was assessed in the study very much from a point of view, okay, net neutrality to do with the openness of the internet, but what are the implications for freedom of expression? And the whole period was to say, well, the debate at the time was whether if you gave fast lanes to certain actors, you would really have an unequal playing field, and new actors producing content would not be able to enter very easily because they'd have to compete against paid for fast lanes. And so from a freedom of expression point of view, net neutrality was then important because you wanted an open playing field for anybody who was producing content to enter without disadvantage. So that was in 2015, and you will find that discussion in the study. Since then, of course, what's interesting is that things have changed a bit. And as is evident in the report of the coalition, the big issue is now perhaps less net neutrality and freedom of expression and more net neutrality and access. And this happens to parallel one of the developments that came out of this study, and this is where UNESCO developed a conceptualization which the member states accepted. And it came out of the study and a conference called Connecting the Dots. And it's pretty simple, but simplicity conceals some more complicated things. But essentially it says if you want a universal internet, you need an internet that's going to be based on 4 principles. And if you look in this little leaflet, it's got a little graphic there. So the 4 principles are very easy to remember because they are under the acronym of ROAM. So the internet should be rights-based, it should be open, it should be accessible, and it should be multi-stakeholder governed. So that's very easy. ROAM, rights, openness, accessibility, multi-stakeholder. And the point of this is to say that you have a package here, and that if you really want the internet to fly, to be universal, and to play its role in sustainable development and everything else, then one's got to strive for these principles. So, as I said, when you went back to 2013, 2014, the debate was how does openness and net neutrality relate to freedom of expression? Now with zero rating, it's no longer so much the O versus the R, the right to freedom of expression, it's also the O versus accessibility, because the whole argument for zero rating is to increase access. So this is an interesting shift. And of course, as people here will very well know, the debate about whether you compromise openness to improve accessibility is essentially, is access to a closed garden, a garden that may have some apples, may have some snakes, if you remember a certain garden in religious history, is access to a closed garden better than being outside Eden? Okay? And this is the debate which has got, a lot of cost-benefit analysis and pros and cons, and of course lots of studies will talk about this. Just a small comment. I think that part of this debate, of course, came with Facebook's open basics, and one could, in retrospect, say that Facebook perhaps ought not to have proposed a closed garden, because if they had had an open system, people would have used Facebook anyway. So, nevertheless, Facebook, as we know, did have a relatively closed garden, and that's what caused controversy, and as people know, some countries actually banned this altogether. In India, as I understand, although I'm not an expert on this question, part of the reason for banning zero rating on this model, the closed garden model, was partially under the media concept of you are going to entrench a dominant power, and that's equivalent to media concentration, and it's you can't allow that anti-competitive development. So in a sense, the Indian argument was more to the R versus the O, and the A was less important. The R was the important argument. But I think most people would also say the A, the accessibility, is the trade-off more than the rights, because although when you do access a closed garden and you have Facebook and a few other sites, your choice is constrained, but nevertheless your ability to express is less constrained, because you're not just a consumer of media content, you are also, of course, a potential producer of content on Facebook, even if that's the only thing that you've got. So it's a complex debate. And I think it ties in a bit with the paper that we'll hear from Luca Belli about the mini-tellization. Anyway, so to come back to my basic point, I think that this model of ROAM is an interesting kind of context because one's talking ultimately about trade-offs, whether it's a trade-off of rights in relation to openness or openness in relation to accessibility. And the interesting thing, of course, is that in all trade-offs you have to figure out public interest, pros and cons, costs and benefits. But I think with this model, what's also important is that if you are only thinking of net neutrality in terms of restricting openness in favor of access, you're missing out the rights dimension. If you're only thinking of openness vis-a-vis rights, you're missing out the access dimension. And if you think of all those, but you don't think of the multi-stakeholder dimension, you're also missing out a key component. So I think this model is useful in a way to kind of produce a methodology to try and think about how policy making on net neutrality can best develop by having a holistic perspective. And the last thing I just want to mention is we have these lovely normative principles at UNESCO, the ROAM. I think they're quite influential. The member states signed off on them. The couple said this will be useful for them for guiding their policies on internet decision making. A norm is one thing, though. Actually giving it some impact is another. So fortunately, in the study, various member states and other actors proposed there should be indicators for this ROAM model. And that's quite a challenge because you would have to develop indicators for how is country X performing on balancing rights vis-a-vis the internet, on openness vis-a-vis the internet, accessibility and multi-stakeholderism. So what becomes very interesting for us is where would net neutrality fit into these indicators? How would you develop indicators that could give you a map of a country in terms of net neutrality within this model and the relevance of net neutrality to openness, accessibility, and rights? And of course, then there's the multi-stakeholder connection. So having said that, I think that I will be listening extremely carefully to what people say because it may be valuable to this development of indicators. If we get these indicators developed and we get the indicators accepted by the member states, then you have standards because now they're endorsed by the international community. So this could be quite powerful as an instrument to encourage good policy making in terms of rights, openness, accessibility, and multi-stakeholderism. Unfortunately, I also have to attend another session, so I have to leave in half an hour. So I do have the book, and I've read your summary, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. And congratulations again to the coalition.
Thanks a lot, Guy, for these excellent introducing remarks. Let me also say that the elements that are included and discussed in the book are also included in a very short survey that you can take using going on the IGF website. In the Dynamic Coalition section, you will have a survey on the outcomes of the various dynamic coalition, and so you can also, after this session, maybe form your opinion and evaluate if you agree or not, or leave a feedback on the various topics that we will discuss today. So without losing any further time, I would like to ask to Olof Storm to provide us some indications, some elements on what has been done at the European level. The Norwegian telecommunications regulator was co-chairing the BEREC that drafted, the working group of BEREC that drafted the new guidelines. So please, the floor is yours to tell us something more about this.
Thank you, Luca. My name is Olof Storm. I work for the Norwegian Communications Authority. And as Luca said, the reason why we are here, the colleague of mine was a co-chair of the BEREC, the body of European regulators expert working group that developed guidelines on net neutrality. So I think I'll start with just saying a little bit of why the guidelines, why were they developed, and also what are they, and also a little bit on how are we going to use them and how are we going to conduct supervision of this regulation. The background is that the European Parliament and Council passed a new regulation on 25th of November last year, which is in effect of mid this year, which regulates requirements for an open internet. And in that regulation, it states that BEREC shall develop guidelines by the 30th of August 2016. And the reason for this, the guidelines are supposed to contribute to a consistent application of this regulation. So it shall provide guidance to the different regulators in Europe on how to supervision and enforcement of these regulations to safeguard the open internet. So basically it is important to understand that the guidelines, the BEREC guidelines, are not a second level legislation. They are guidelines developed for the regulators, and also of course guidelines to provide guidance also to the market. But first and utmost, it is a guide for the regulators and how to conduct supervision of and how to interpret the maybe unclear or ambiguous provisions in the regulation. So that is the main purpose for that. I think that is basically the foundation for it. And just briefly on how we are going to use the guidelines in our work in Norway. We are going to provide guidance to the market in Norway, and especially we're going to use our website to provide that guidance. We will continue to have meetings and dialogue meetings with the Norwegian operators to discuss the matters, and of course we will investigate cases on a case-by-case basis if that is needed. If we have cases of the different commercial practices or different practices on traffic management and so on. We will also use, we currently have a system for measuring speeds of broadband connection in Norway. So we will continue to use that speed test system, and we are also currently developing an app to be used for mobile terminals to also be able to measure speeds on mobile terminals. That will be ready, I think, beginning of next year. And also we will investigate if we need to make adjustments or alterations to this system to be able to measure other things that is required in this new regulation. We will of course also use, and what also BEREC is planning to do, to develop a set of questionnaires to be sent out to the operators and how their practices are. So we will also use that in Norway to ask them how they conduct their business. And of course we will also gather inputs from the market, end users, whatever, that's are notifying us about possible breaches of this regulation. And of course then we will also then produce a report which is also required in the regulation, and the BEREC guidelines are also helping the regulators to how that report should be written and so on, and the dates why they are to be submitted, because this should also be submitted to BEREC and to the Commission, which we will then be able to compare within the European market. So I think that is, and of course we will continue, we will continue our national net neutrality forum. We had in the past also since 2009 a national forum to discuss with stakeholders how to treat net neutrality. And of course we will also use BEREC Net Neutrality Expert Working Group to seek guidance from the other regulators in Europe to discuss difficult cases on, for example, commercial practices. So I think that's basically what I will start with, and of course if you have questions, please.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arnold. Thanks a lot also for highlighting that the role of the BEREC guidelines is not only to specify some elements that could be a little bit vague in the regulation, but also to allow an harmonization of the implementation. That is a very essential tool for regulators in Europe, and it's very it's very good to know that you are also elaborating an app, so that you also involve the user into the monitoring of the regulation, which is a very excellent strategy. So I would like to ask now to Rosalind to provide us some insight on another very tricky issue that has been emerging over the past couple of years, that is ad blocking, and what are the implications with net neutrality regulations.
So, well, good morning, everyone. I have to say it's a tough act to follow UNESCO and the Norwegian regulators, but I will do my best. I want to begin, first of all, I just want to salute you, Luca. You have not one but two books you've presented at this IGF, and this is the third year I've been involved in this report. Luca is a dynamo. He's done an amazing job to organize two coalitions. This report is the fourth report. Anyone can submit a paper. We have a peer review process. And I think if you look at the quality and the depth and breadth of the articles, they just get better and better. And so I'm delighted to be a part of it, and thank you for all the work to put this together. So, we're going to. I want to talk about ad blocking today and human rights. And one of the discussions we hear in amongst our net neutrality, this is not about economics, it's about human rights. And I really think that that's been a failure of economists to connect economics to human rights, because in fact economics comes from human rights. Going back even before Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments, it was all about we have limited amount of resources and we have an unlimited amount of needs. How do we do this in the most ethical and equitable way? So this attempt is to try to help bridge that gap, and an issue has emerged since the European Union net neutrality process with BEREC, and has kind of informed this particular paper. And it's also interesting for me, before I worked in academia, I actually worked in internet advertising, so I know a lot about this industry, how it works, and so on. And it's certainly an interesting issue. I think when we talk about net neutrality and not bringing in the economics, we don't talk a lot about the ad platforms. And a lot of what's driving the internet is advertising. This is a huge part about what goes on. And I would like to bring this into the discussion to help us understand some of these issues. And what's interesting, if we take the Indian case that was referenced before, this is a kind of a critique, we couldn't have a free Facebook. But on the other hand, what you do have in India today is an advertising monopoly. And, the Indian government in this decision not only banned the ability of, Facebook to compete with a monopoly, but any Indian company. So I think it's important to just say this is only about human rights. You're actually limiting the discussion about human rights, because the rate of ads that people see is also a human rights issue, at least according to the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and the e-Privacy Directive. So in the paper I reference a number of sources, but there is an estimate on a typical mobile subscription, anywhere between 20 to 80% of the traffic will be advertising. Users see upwards of 5,000 ads a day when they from all the various media that they see. And it's estimated about 1 in 5 people employ ad blockers Just a show of hands, anybody using an ad blocker? Okay, so roughly, so this is now, but let me explain something. Ad blocking doesn't mean you're against advertising, okay, and I'm going to go into that. A lot of people, they're okay with brand messages, they just have a concern about a lot of ads, and for a variety of reasons. So one of the issues, though, with net neutrality is the sense that if all data is the same and all packets are the same and all traffic's the same, that we have to meter and value advertising to the end user financially the same as, let's say, the news content or the video or so on. And maybe it didn't matter so much if we all had fixed line networks, but it may matter on a mobile network where we are paying for data, there may be limited bandwidth, and the way that the ads behave on the network can be disruptive to other users and to the user's safety. This has also been an issue brought up by Ellen Goodman. She's a human rights expert at Princeton, where she talked about her critique of the European BEREC guidelines was that they were engaging in what she called edge centrism, where we were putting the rights of the advertisers above the end users. And the particular issue was that the Internet Advertising Bureau of Europe was objecting to ad blockers deployed at the network level. They were okay with them at the application level, but they said we can't have them at the network level. And this, from the perspective of this human rights activist, was a form of edge centrism. One of the other challenges is we have almost 1 billion people using ad blockers today, but it's somewhat difficult because, for example, Google Play, you can't download ad blockers. There's an issue around certain regulators saying some kind of ad blockers are allowed and others aren't. This is also an issue here in developing countries because of the cost constraints. And there's another challenge here, especially if you went to Luca's session on Monday when we looked at community networks. There's a real challenge of getting networks in rural areas, in remote areas, in poor areas. And if we're considering that a lot of traffic may be advertising, that this is an economic question for end users. And if we're requiring these traditional models, traditional net neutrality model, that all data has to be treated the same, it's going to make it even more difficult for poor and disadvantaged communities to be able to build their networks because they don't have a way to recover. They don't have a way to price the services appropriately based upon what's most necessary for them. So a very interesting survey from Ghostery, one of the most widely used ad management solution, and it said, well, of 100 million people who were using a survey of these users, why did they use it? Well, 20% said they used ad blockers for digital self-defense. They believed privacy is their right. They felt that ads were violating their privacy. That was one reason. Usability was another reason. A lot of, if you may experience yourself, the way that ads appear, they could be popping up, different ways that make it difficult to engage with the website, with the content. Also, people have the various phones that they have, or if they try to turn off an ad, it makes the ad turn on and so on. So usability was an issue. But interestingly, the number one reason people had deployed ad blockers was security, 40%. And we have an increasing challenge with malvertising, which is fake advertising embedded in advertising. It's upwards now of $10 billion of losses a year. And one of the issues of why cloud level or network level blockers are important is that if you are interested in security, which we all increasingly are, that you need to stop any kind of malware at the network level. You don't want it in the network, you don't want it in the device, you don't want it close to your users. So in many respects, there's a legitimate case here to deploy network level ad blockers because they're more effective, they conserve the network capacity, they protect the safety of the user, and they improve the user experience. Cost control was there. The other issue is speed. A lot of ads will delay the speed of mobile content. And you have another case of battery life, that many cases ads will have blinking and signaling and so on. That also drains the battery in the device. Now, legitimately, there are arguments against ad blocking. Of course, you know, how do we pay for internet content? This is the crucial issue of internet any way you slice it, is we have to have a way to be able to pay for internet content. In some ways, you could say this is perhaps opposed to the idea of free culture, right? So there's an essential tension between the essential idea of net neutrality and free culture from what Larry Lessig talked about, and then the idea of content providers want to be, well, artists want to be compensated, want to make a living, and then the commercial interests to create platforms to deliver content. You need to to do that. And if ads are an important part of that, we wouldn't have the internet today if we didn't have ads. Legitimately, ad blocking is a violation of free speech. Certainly in the United States, it's part of the First Amendment. Advertising goes back to the founding of the United States. So that is that's an issue. And the other issue is maybe privacy. So let me wrap up here with the solutions. Now, could we make a regulatory solution? Should we make a class of traffic called advertising that regulators could regulate and make sure it's not advertising's not fair and make unfair and deceptive? But interestingly, ad blocking, more than regulation, has forced a lot of advertisers to improve their advertising. So the Internet Advertising Bureau has adopted the lean standards, light encrypted, ad choice supported, non-invasive ads. So in many cases, this market response to a problem of too much advertising has forced the advertisers to make better advertising that's less invasive. One solution is saying no data caps. That is one way to go. The challenge with that is we don't address the security concerns. Another would be, could we have new business models, better ways to monetize content, microtransactions? The other area could be user compensation, and I think this goes back to the key message here, that in many cases, maybe advertisers should be paying for the transmission of their ads. We know this model from television, radio, print, where advertisers were helping to pay for the cost of the network. So this may be something that we need to think about as we go forward and saying, how do we optimize our goals for network investment and human rights? And we may have to allow the advertisers to participate to help pay for the transaction, not just the end user.
Thanks a lot, Rosalind, for highlighting the complexity of this issue, and also not only focusing on the fact that advertisement consumes data, but also on the fact that advertisement blocking tools could be used directly by users, but also by network operators. So that is also a very crucial element that should be taken into consideration when any kind of regulatory reply is elaborated. I would like to, speaking about regulation, I would like to ask to Carlos Brito to provide us some elements on what is going on here in Mexico, because you have had a very interesting reform. There is consultations going on, and you have not. Well, there should be consultation going on. Yeah, and I know that you have a very insightful perspective on this, thanks to the study that you did last year.
Thank you, Luca. Good morning, everyone. Well, what I presented for the book here is pretty much a brief version of a report, not a research, a report that we did in 2015, because according to the regulator's plan, the IFT, the Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones, the net neutrality rulemaking process that will start with a consultation process was supposed to start in August 2015, and now we are in December 2016. That's not happening, and that's pretty much 2.5 years of unapplicable laws. But what I want to tell you is just to make a framework on how is the new legislation on net neutrality in Mexico. In 2013, there was a major constitutional reform on telecommunications and competition. So we created mainly 2 new institutions. They were taken off the president's sphere. They now are constitutionally autonomous regulators for competition and telecommunications. However, the telecommunications regulator is also competition for unit for only telecommunications matter. It's kind of complex when we deal with net neutrality, because when we talk about net neutrality, it's not only on telcos, but also on online content. So there is, at some point, there probably will be a judicial issue on what the role of the antitrust unit, the other institution we created, will be on the net neutrality issue, but well. So we reformed the Article 6 of the Constitution to be in these terms. Telecommunications are public services of general interest. Therefore, the state should guarantee they are provided in conditions of competition, quality, plurality, universal coverage, interconnectivity, convergence, continuity, free access, and without arbitrary interference. From the discussion of that constitutional reform, of the paragraph I just mentioned, in the Congress, we wanted to know what does that mean? No? Will that mean in the secondary law? And many lawmakers say, well, probably this will lead to a net neutrality law when it comes the next year. So, and it makes sense when you see what is the specific phrasing they were using. And so, as you can see, when you state in this constitutional reform that telecommunication services are general interest public services, the whole discussion that they had in the United States on this just public utility versus information services debate, we just went through it. It's a public service here of general interest. And well, we created this new regulator, this kind of different regulator. I have had the chance to talk with other regulator designs on what is their perspective, and that's very important. What is their perspective on their own work? Are they dealing with human rights or not? And you'll find many regulators say, no, we're dealing with economics. That's not human rights. We're dealing with information services. That's not human rights. But in the design, the very core design of Mexican's regulator, as I said, is a constitutionally autonomous. It doesn't depend on political parties like in the US, not on government. So the Constitution says that the regulator should be what we call here the organogrante, like an institution that is protecting human rights, which freedom of expression, access to information, it has a competition and a regulation unit. And we had this reform because we had major concentration problems in broadcasting and telecommunication services. And actually, we were discussing in the case of television concentration, there was national television concentration. We had this issue on this chicken and egg relation on why people like so much soap operas. You know? And soap operas is not probably the best content that you want to when you want to educate people as well. Soap operas are good. I'm not against the soap operas, but it was why the people want them. Well, because probably because for 70 years that's the only thing they have been offered. But so this is a circular argument on why is the demand on that specific content, and I am mentioning this because of the zero rating debate that I will mention later. So we have this enormous concentration in broadcasting services and telecommunication services, and we had to do this reform, which is working pretty much well, slowly in some cases and not so much in others. And right now, well, we also have a problem of vertical concentration in terms that, for example, the major player for mobile services, Telcel from Carlos Slim, you will know it, is also right now having, Telcel has an app store, Telcel has football, soccer teams, stream services, video services, music services. They are developing games, video games. So it's getting broader, the vertical concentration, and that may be an issue. I'm not saying that it's already, I have the feeling that it may be. So, and when we go and say what's the public opinion of telcos in net neutrality, they are pretty silent, pretty much. They're not publicly talking about this as being an issue, but on their own alliance to talk about public policy issues in the public sphere is called ANATEL, the Asociación Nacional de Telecomunicaciones, and they are to be pretty shy to actually talk about net neutrality issues. But the whole thing is we reviewed how has happened in other places, because we want to tell to the regulator who was supposed to have in the rulemaking process what has happened in Mexico. And we found, well, we have some cases of blocking. Yes, we found Telmex, the fixed services from Carlos Slim companies. They were blocking Skype in 2007, 2008. But there were different opinions on what was should the state do on those blockings of Skype? And well, pretty much it ended up because of the consumers' pressure, not because of regulators, not because of laws. We have the whole traditional zero rating everywhere in the major players, and in the smallest of players, they do exactly the same. Because there is also this saying that probably they will foster the diversity of offers of different zero-rated services, but it's not happening. It's always the same three: Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and in every single player. How much time I have? 1 minute. Well, so. There is no evidence of throttling. That's the problem. The games of throttling. There are some signs that there may be a problem with it, but the whole game in this issue is that actually the user has no possibility to actually say, okay, here is a problem. There's no possibility to create evidence. But summing it up, we have may have a problem with zero rating and some or possibilities that have happened, like blocking in Mexico. But the deal is that we have a regulator who has to take into consideration so many human rights that, I have to say it, in Mexico have come to a different tradition. It's not the same tradition. For example, the privacy right in Europe is not the same in the Latin American context. In this human rights system is not the same on Mexican tradition. The same with freedom of expression, and specifically in the obligation, the 4 kinds of obligations the state has to answer to how to manage those deals. So the IFT has a very complicated deal. In my perspective, BEREC's guidelines are a very good base to start processing many of the most complicated issues. However, we will have to create a very strict control of constitutionality and conventionality for the specific Mexican case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And before we pass to the second segment, discussing zero rating, I would like to open the floor for comments, remarks. Please be quite concise so that we can speedily go to the second segment. So if you want to raise your hand to make comments or observation on this, okay, 1, okay, 1, 2, 3. So you can start.
Thank you very much.
Introduce yourself when you start.
My name is Rajan Matthews, and I represent the mobile operators in India. COAI is the organization I represent. So just 2 quick comments. One is that this notion of rights is, in our opinion, a bit dangerous because it leads to law and legality enforcement, which is very antithesis to an open internet and the reason why the internet was started in the first place as private domains. So I think we would be very concerned about this notion of the internet in terms of a rights-based, maybe an opportunities-based discussion might better serve the interests of the discussion. The second point I'd like to raise is the issue that the professor has made in terms of the economics of the deal. Invariably, what we find is that in all of these discussions, the access service providers get the short end of the deal. Right? The rest of these folks who play the internet are invariably excused, and the cost lands up as a result of these discussions on the access service providers, which, as in the case in India, are licensed and under government control in most instances. So 2 things that I'd like to make sure is part of the discussion. Thank you.
I think we have Pedro and then Gonzalo.
May I ask a quick question? Yes. It's concerning the ad block panel. You mentioned the notion of digital self-defense. Do you believe that, I believe when you have the notion of digital self-defense, you create some kind of opposition between the user and the business, and each one is going to try to invent tools to overcome the other over time. Do you believe that that competition can be healthy by itself, or it needs some kind of regulation as to how far business can go to try and overcome ad blockers, or how far ad blockers can go to overcome advertisements? Basically, if it can be healthy to just leave it be, or we should have some regulation to make it healthier?
Gonzalo López Barajas from Telefónica. Luca, you did make a differentiation when talking on ad blocking, stating that there was a difference between consumers implementing ad blocking and network operators implementing ad blocking. I wonder what is the difference of downloading an app and a user activating it, or a user explicitly asking ISP provider to block the ads. So I would say that it's pretty much the same approach. So I would say there is not a differentiation on that regards.
Do you want to start with?
Sure. So, well, thank you for the questions. So in terms of the gentleman from the, I think that is a concern in many cases. If we look from the economic side, two-sided markets is interested in finding efficient outcomes where, and that is all, this is where we have a debate in net neutrality. Where is it net neutrality, which is the edge provider wins, which is the edge provider that is the idea, or the two-sided markets where you're trying to find an efficient outcome. So I think I can certainly understand his perspective where he would say that the operators get the short end of the stick. In the idea of this digital self-defense, there are definitely scholars who work on digital self-defense. I'm using it more in a colloquial sense. I'm not suggesting regulation necessarily, but what's interesting is market forces have enabled digital self-defense. And interestingly, they have succeeded to force the advertisers better than any regulation. The EU had adopted a cookie law, which people have said has been a disaster. It's upwards of $2 billion a year in lost productivity, wasted time. People don't go on to the website because a pop-up comes up. They don't know how to disable it and so on. But interestingly, ad blocking in a very short period of time succeeded to make the largest advertisers improve their ads. So certainly maybe not the best solution, but it was effective to send a signal. Pricing is a signal. To send a signal to the advertisers, improve it. And then finally, I don't necessarily buy into the view that there's necessarily a conflict or antithesis, but certainly if you would interview some users, they do feel oppressed or offended from the amount of advertising that they see, many cases feeling like they can't control it. And they're happy to pay their mobile operator to block the ads for them. So personally, I don't make a distinction if the user downloads the ad or the network provider does it, but I would say that the network provider offering a network level ad blocker solution has a better solution to manage the security. In many cases, you are working with a mobile operator. You rely on them to block malware, to block, governments ask them to block offensive material and so on. So, I would, in this case, maybe disagree with, perhaps those in BEREC that were saying maybe network level blocking was not acceptable. I mean, incidentally, the BEREC guidelines are not binding. So even though I know the regulators in the EU want to work together, the operators are not required to follow those guidelines. I don't think they want to necessarily object to them, but there is a considerable amount of debate about the guidelines in the EU. It's not not everyone is happy about them.
Yes. Just to provide a quick reply to Gonzalo's question. I think the point I wanted to stress before is indeed that when a user downloads an ad and knows how to define the setting of the ads, is actually in power of what ads he is blocking. Whereas when it is the telecom operator that define a network level ad blocking, is the telecom operator that defines what kind of ads are blocked and how, and also it requires a previous monitoring of traffic, which in some countries, for instance in Brazil, would be illegal because deep packet inspection would be not, the monitoring of the content of the traffic would not be, would be contrary to the law. And that is also a thorny issue in Europe, where also the guidelines and regulation were quite explicit in saying that the monitoring practices have to be reviewed by data protection regulators. But that is just a beginning of an answer. If you want, we can discuss this more later. And I would like now, to pass to the second segment of the session, because we only have 40 minutes left, and to start introducing a very prominent debate, a very prominent issue that is occupying probably the minds of net neutrality opponents and proponents over the past couple of years, which is zero rating. So zero rating is basically there are 7 chapters dedicated to zero rating in this book. Some are pro zero ratings, some are against zero ratings, some analyze it to try to define a taxonomy of different kind of zero rating, and I think it's very useful to inform the debate. But zero rating is basically sponsoring specific applications, right? In the first chapter, when I speak about zero rating as I asked the question, indeed, if it could be a switch from a generative internet to a mobile Minitel. For those who do not know what is the Minitel was a very popular network in France in the 90s, where the operators decided which kind of application the user could receive, and the telecom regulator approved which kind of application could receive. So it was a centralized model with a control from operator and regulator, basically. The question that I ask, and I would like to ask to have a reflection on, is whether zero rating could not turn a generative internet into a mobile Minitel. Why am I saying so? Because the internet differs from its predecessors, because internet users, the internet has an end-to-end distributed open architecture, and the internet users are not only recipients or of a predefined service. For instance, in PSTN network, the network was optimized for voice. In the Minitel, the network was optimized for the predefined set of applications defined by the operator. The internet is completely different because the user is at the center, although it is at the edges of the network. It is at the center because it can not only access content and applications, but also produce and freely share its creativity, its content, its application. So the user is not a mere consumer, is a prosumer. He can produce and consume at the same time. What is important to understand of zero rating models is that they are based on 2 elements: the sponsoring of applications or a set of applications on the one hand, but also the existence of a data cap, and frequently a very reduced data cap, because there are studies, for instance, a study by Week Consult made for the BEREC last year that explicitly says that users have an interest in zero rating practices when data cap are particularly low. So in that case, that could trigger a sort of vicious circle where the operator keeps the data caps low in order to maintain zero rating offering attractive. And that is something that actually it has been observed in the EU market and also in OECD market. The Rewheel Digital Fuel Monitor reports since 2014 have shown that in the markets where zero rating practices were introduced, there were considerable increases in the price of the open internet. Why? Because the operators kept the data cap low so that the zero rating offering could be interesting to attract new users. On the other hand, in the market where zero rating offering have been banned, for instance, in the Netherlands, the opposite phenomenon has been observed. The week after the ban on zero rating, the main national operator doubled the data. Is this working? Are you hearing me? I've been sabotaged. So, yeah, exactly. I've been capped. So the opposite phenomenon has been observed in the Netherlands, where when the national consumer regulator decided to ban zero rating. The week after, the main operator doubled data caps to promote careless usage of the internet. Those were the word of KPN CEO. So the goal was indeed to promote usage by increasing volume, and that is something that has been also observed in Brazil when one of the operators decided to eliminate zero rating offerings, and the week after it doubled the data caps, therefore reducing by 60% the cost of internet access. So another important element that is in the chapter, the first chapter of the book, is that I think it is very important we have a distinction amongst different different types of zero rating. We cannot only speak about zero rating as if it was a unique thing. There are zero rating plans where an operator selects the applications and can select maybe vertically integrated services. There are other plans where the content application provider can sponsor the application, and in this case, mainly content application provider that have good financial resources can sponsor applications. There are zero rating platforms such as Facebook Free Basics that could be open, such as the version of Facebook Free Basic where everyone can build and include services, but they can also be closed, such as the first Internet.org version where only 12 or 13 applications were provided. And finally, there is also some zero rating that is fully compatible with net neutrality. For instance, what I call application agnostic zero rating. For instance, Mozilla Equal Rating, or the MSent application, or in India Aircel program that provides data usage, a data package per month that the user is free to use as he or she wants. And for a couple of months, he will have this data package so that the usage of the internet as an internet user could do, so in receiving but also imparting information and innovation can be promoted. So that was my very long introduction. But I actually, as we have lost 2 panelists, I think we can have a little bit more of time to discuss this. I would like now to ask to Javier. Is it working? You have to be very close to the mic.
Okay, let's hope this keeps working. Great. So how much time do I have? So 7 minutes. Okay. So, well, my name is Javier Paliero. I work at Access Now, which is a digital rights organization, and I'm here to talk about the first of the articles you will find in the book in the part of zero rating pros and cons. This article was authored by Gustav Bjorsten, Raman Hitsing Chima, and Estelle Massey from our team. And basically we are in the opinion of the cons on zero rating, especially on not as a matter of principle, but on the implementations and flavors that we have seen so far on the internet. So to start, I would like just to assert a couple of basic arguments that found much of the work that we do at Access Now, which is that we believe that the internet is a rights-based technology. Why do we believe that? We believe that because we think that the design of an agnostic end-to-end dump network, which was the main idea behind the design of the internet, actually promotes free speech and makes it a really very useful resource to do that. And on the rights-based rhetorics of what we think that the internet is and how it should keep working, we think that the role of regulation in the state is quite important. Actually, we can find that part of the growth of the internet, I guess, in the US is also a response to some regulatory decisions. For instance, the idea of deregulating the market in the 80s and the 90s of the telecommunications industry, it's a regulatory decision, even if the decision is to deregulate something. And other pieces of legislation, like the Communications Decency Act and other similar legislation in the world, have actually encouraged the participation of more actors in the internet, allowing them to express their opinions without the fear of repression in the case of intermediaries, for instance. So that's the base about all of our arguments and our understanding on these issues. So you can understand how we arrived to the conclusion that I'm going to share with you. So in the beginning, we just would like to say that, well, we in the article, we define what zero rating is. Luca has just offered an explanation. This is something that is quite easy to understand, but we differentiate 2 kinds of zero rating practices that we have seen in the world. We call the first one the telco model, which is this practice where a telco, a telecommunications internet provider, strikes deals with specific partners, or just to benefit their services or the services that their own telco is going to provide. For instance, their own video platform, or probably striking a deal with a music service so to exempt it from data caps. So that would be what we call the telco model. The other model that we have identified is what we call the sub-internet model, or which I personally call the man-in-the-middle model, which is the model that arrives from services like Facebook's Free Basics, especially at the first iterations, which is an intermediary between the user and the experience that they have of the internet, where this intermediary decides what kind of applications you are going to have access to, and this in the middle of this exchange of traffic. We have an opinion against both of those models. At first, on the telco model, the main objection that we have is that actually the main objection to all of net neutrality, which is the curtailment of speech and choice. In the telco model, we have seen that there is a usage of some quality of service technologies in order to identify and promote a specific content, or to exempt it from data caps. Actually, we assert in the paper that quality of service technologies were in the beginning created to offer to the user the ability to shape their own experience at the router level in their home. Okay, so this understanding that because we have heard that some telco proponents of this telco model of zero rating say that quality of service exists in the design of the technology. So therefore, this means that the creators intended to allow these kind of practices by using this technology to shape the traffic. But we say that this is intended actually for the user to shape their own experience, and instead of getting there's this forced experience over their access or their enjoyment of the internet. And the other model that we identified, that is a sub-internet model. It's the most controversial one, because we see that there is an intermediary between the person that is using the internet and the experience that they have of the web. And there's a problem here, because actually there was a mention by the person from the UNESCO at the beginning about the importance of privacy and these revelations about spying and stuff like that. One of the ways in which users themselves and some market actors have developed solutions for that is encryption. For instance, this sub-internet model offered by, for instance, the Free Basics experience is incompatible with encryption, because encryption would be a way of going around this necessary monitoring that has to happen in order to exempt these specific applications from the data caps. In this sense, this is incompatible with encryption. It establishes a restriction and a kind of control that comes from surveilling or monitoring traffic, okay, which is something that we think provides less innovation and less opportunity for internet users to actually use the internet and engage in businesses and all of the benefits that arise from the internet. Actually, this assertion that these restrictions and control are negative for the adoption of the internet is also in the report by the Alliance for Affordable Internet, where it was found that zero rating did not bring most mobile internet users online for the first time, and that the majority of users, actually 82%, prefer access to the full internet with time or data limitations if restrictions had to be imposed instead of content limitations. Okay, so there was already mentions about how regulators are dealing with it. We also covered that in the short report that we wrote, and there was a mention about TRI, a mention about BEREC, which, by the way, banned the sub-internet model in the guidelines of the implementation by national regulators of net neutrality rules. It is in the articles in paragraphs 17 and 42 to 48. So just you can see that the sources there in the paper. So bottom line, we think that any solutions for enabling access or incentivizing the consumption of the internet and stuff like that need to be compatible with basic human rights provisions, which are the free flow of information, freedom of expression, and the guarantee of the right to privacy, which is something that sometimes gets a little bit lost in the discussion about the zero-rating models, which is how the network traffic should be or not be surveilled or monitored or whatever, and at what extent, and which technologies and which limitations should those technologies have. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Javier. And as we have lost two of the panelists, we have more time for discussion. Excellent. So I'm pretty sure we will have some reactions to this and some comments. So if you want to raise your hand to make a comment, please. Oh, okay. So, yeah, the gentleman in the back. Do we have a mic for the gentleman there?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jorge Vargas, and I represent the Wikimedia Foundation. Some of you may know the Wikimedia Foundation started 4 years ago a zero-rating program called Wikipedia Zero, by means of which we've been partnering with mobile operators to provide free access to the full Wikipedia service, not only read-only, but also to edit. I have a question for the room that is something that we've been discussing internally, and 2 years ago, we came up with what we call our operating principles, which are 10 rules by means of which we want to have the program to be aligned with open internet principles and at the same time aligned with our mission. That said, we currently are evaluating not only the impact of the program, but the impact of those operating principles. Are those principles in fact fulfilling or satisfying the questions that come out with zero rating, and specifically with Wikipedia Zero? My question for the room and for the panelists would be, going a little bit meta, are principles or rules something that could be applied in a more general way to zero rating, in a way in which we could still keep what we believe is positive from zero rating practices, such as ours, which we think is in fact providing access to freely licensed information, providing people the opportunity to also contribute back their content on the encyclopedia in countries where affordability is still a barrier to access the internet. But we see from many other platforms that there are not a list of rules or a list of principles, and we were the first ones to kind of like come up with the idea. So I wonder if people would consider that creating a line of principles or a line of rules to do zero rating positively or responsibly could be a good way to move the debate forward, instead of going at a black and white yes or no model, which I think it's what's going on right now. And secondly, I think that, and I think everyone in the room has that in their minds, we need more information, we need more data to actually see if these models and these platforms are actually impacting the people that needs to be impacted. The Alliance for the Affordable Internet did a great job with this. We are starting our own research. We're starting to do a little bit of surveys and one-on-one interviews with people that we think could be helping us inform our decisions. But I want to keep that question open about principles for responsible zero rating to the room. Thank you.
Do we have, I think we have other, I would take other two comments and then we can open. So please, yeah.
There we go. Hi, my name is Jivan Macedonia. You know, anytime Wikipedia or someone like that with such credibility makes the case for something like this, we're all convinced that it is a good way to go. And I would immediately, as you were speaking, actually, I was kind of attracted to supporting that. But the thing is that it's a dangerous floodgate to open. I think that, you know, net neutrality is a very important principle. And if we start playing with that, it's going to go much more in a different direction that I don't think we wish. So
I think come on there.
There we go. Good morning. Am I on here? My name's Alan Lewine. I'm here with Privacy Fundamentals. However, for the last 9 years until some months ago, I was with Comcast. Before that, I spent time with AOL, and before that with PBS. And so I've dealt with these internet backbone and net neutrality issues for a bunch of years now. And I'd really actually like to respond to the last comment a bit, but in general for the panelists, when we talk about net neutrality, and I haven't yet reviewed in very much depth the new European regulation. My question really is, we need to mess with the important principle of net neutrality, I believe, because I noticed that the European regulation has a basis of all traffic treated equally, no throttling, no blocking. And there are at least some limited exceptions for reasonable network management, for protecting the integrity and the safety of the network. Is there prioritization capabilities allowed for things like suppressing child pornography, for things like paying to build pipes big enough to have massive content providers able to get their content through? For instance, aside from the massive ones, very high-level important traffic. If we have online medical resources available, should that be prioritized over other types of traffic? I don't know to the extent this is built into the EU reg, and maybe there are other people here that share my ignorance, and we could get a comment on that.
We have last comment here, and then we can open.
I think that cap is a crime against the consumer. But the question is how to build the capacity to support the growth of the traffic. Maybe the answer is in the public interest. And this is a question just to make alive this debate and not running off the focus.
Actually, to directly reply to this last comment, one of the reasons why zero rating plans have been deployed is it has been announced as a way to connect the unconnected, right? And I think there is some sort of misconception, because the fact that zero rating is maybe a possible option doesn't mean that is the only option. And I was thinking about this also because I know that you are very much involved in community networks, which are actually a very feasible option. And we are presenting another report in 2 hours in room 8, I think, room 9, sorry, on community networks and how can people, local communities, develop their own network to enhance infrastructure. And actually that does not only mean that they could be connected. It also means that they could, having created local infrastructure, that the infrastructure, that connectivity, can also create demand for other traditional operators. That is, there are not incompatible things, there are very much compatible elements that could be built in synergy. I don't want to monopolize the debate, so I will let also the other panelists reply to the...
Okay. I think, answering to Vargas, Wikimedia, I think we're well beyond the black and white discussion. Actually, I was asking who is actually in the India trade position as a country. I think no country is going there. I mean, we are going to the gray areas, what to do. And in terms of principles, yeah, principles of whom? Principles of Wikipedia, principles of the regulator, principles of... And what can you do with those principles? That's the main question. But even above that is, what do you want to protect? We want to protect freedom of expression, we want to protect user rights, we want to protect innovations, we want to protect so much things. It's an environment, very complicated environment, ecosystem. And the next question is how we're going to do it. Is the tool, that's important part of the BEREC rule, I think. integrating the human rights discourse. Is this tool necessary? Is this tool proportional? Has transparency? Is it enforceable? What are the consequences of not applying them? Those are the questions for the principles, because there is this discourse saying that yes, let's make it principle based, but principles with not consequences, principles that are in the air, and that's a main issue. I want to say I find this discussion in every single world panel I participate on. When we talk about rights, because I hear here on my left, I hear talking about rights is dangerous. Let's talk about opportunities. I think that it happens a lot that the human rights is the word, the phrase is understood very differently in every single part of the world. Even in my own country, many people, when they hear human rights, they think on money, for example. Oh, human rights are expensive, therefore we don't have a lot of money, therefore you don't have to have human rights. Let's agree that the concept of human rights is very different, and maybe we are talking in the same position. So that this kind of dialogue is that's very important for.
I think Rosie and then Arnulf.
So, well, let me start again by saying I also want to thank Luca, because it's a very rich discussion, and to make sure that you get a copy of our book. And I'm also going to point out, I'm going to make 3 quick points. If you go to Social Science Research Network, ssrn.com, I have 3 papers going into a lot of these details. What I want to give you are some, maybe the other perspectives when you're looking at these issues of data caps and zero rating, which you should take into account. I think that, you know, for those who are looking at net neutrality, in the introduction of this book written by Tim Wu, he's talking about the internet as a utility. Now, if you're going to accept the internet as a utility and you look at how we regulate utility markets, you need to accept that even in utility markets, there are limits. There are concepts such as data caps in utility markets. There is zero rating in utility markets. In fact, we have more pricing flexibility in electricity markets than we have in internet markets, interestingly enough. And they have even less, and this is a case where you have just one net. They have more pricing flexibility than most mobile operators. But in this case, if you look at an issue of a data cap, I may want to go further on the train, but I can't. But, you know, I can't complain to the train company, gee, you're violating my rights to go further on the train. There's a data cap on the train. If you look at the history of data caps over time, the bundles that we consume, the prices that we have, the bundles get bigger and the prices are falling. So data caps are it's a temporary solution. It's not the prices that we have today, they're changing quarter by quarter. So the sense that data cap is, you know, a threat to existence and so on, it actually changes very quickly. On top of that, where we have the case of the KPN in the Netherlands, it's easy for the incumbent to remove a data cap because they have the largest network. The data cap practice is more important for the entrant operator because they have restrictions on their spectrum. They have smaller networks. They need to be able to ensure they can control their capacity and make sure that the users get the adequate amount for what they've paid. So you need to just square the idea of data caps with utilities. With regard to this very important point about principles, I think you also have to put regulators in the real world perspective. They are trying very hard around the world to address this issue. And even if you look at the Alliance for Affordable Internet, their incidence of the zero rating plans were 1% to 2% of all the plans that they covered. So we have to understand in the regulators' world, they have a lot on their table, and that we're asking them to look at such a small part of the market when they have huge responsibilities on their plate, you know, managing the competition issues, managing security and privacy, a whole range of things that we need to be able to have a proper perspective for, you know, this particular concern in light of the amount of revenue we're talking about and in light of the number of people for whom it's an issue. And finally, I just want to say I have done a lot of research on Facebook Free Basics. My own research is I have contacted the app developers who use Free Basics, and I have asked them, how many net new users do you get as a result of Free Basics? A case of the Prockelt Foundation in Africa, they have 10 million net new users who specifically want Free Basics for AIDS and for maternity. And this is a legitimate case where people who are truly suffering because they can't walk and they can't work. This is the only kind of health care that they have. They live in remote areas. And I think this idea that this is how is a sub-internet, that this is a less than a viable means to use the internet, it's an affront to truly poor people who are availing themselves to a real technology that's helping them save their lives, extend their lives. And we need to recognize that just because it may not be your idea of what is a perfect internet, for these 10 million people it is. And it doesn't mean that they won't continue and do other things. But they're real people who are using these services every day, who are get value from them. And we can't devalue that because it doesn't fit our ideal sense of what the internet should be.
Thank you, Rosen. And sorry, Arnold, before I get to you, we have, I think, a rare occasion of having two internet pioneers in the same room by chance. So I would like to ask I hate to put people on the spot, but I would like to ask to Louis Pouzin, who is one of the fathers of the internet. Actually, Windsurf, he was an inspiration for Windsurf. So I would like to ask to Louis Pouzin, who is here with us today. Thank you, Louis. And also to Bob Frankston, who is the father of home networking, to give us a couple of, maybe 1 minute of what is your perspective on the debate that we are having here?
I can't really do 1 minute, so I'll make it very brief. Okay, so just very brief. I do agree that Facebook Basics serves a need, and we shouldn't confuse that with a discussion of the internet. But I also think there's a long discussion of the difference between a utility and infrastructure. And I think that we need a different narrative for the internet. But I don't want to confuse the two discussions. And that's something, again, a longer discussion.
Thanks a lot, Bob. And Bob will also be introducing the session on community connectivity at 12. So I would like to have maybe 2 words from Louis Pouzin, who is also can also tell us what are the bad sides maybe of Minitel, because he has some, I think, some thoughts on it. Can someone pass a mic to Mr. President?
Thanks for giving me a few minutes. Well, I've been involved a few years ago in net neutrality discussions, but mostly because I've felt there was a lot of technical matters involved and they were misunderstood. But now it looks like it's no longer the major problem. As far as I can hear here, most of the matters in the end impact the whole society. It depends how we want to share capacities, share opportunities, and share benefits among the various citizens of a certain part of the world. And obviously there is no single solution to that. The world is diverse. Some countries are still sovereign, not all. And I guess there is no solution if we want to come up with a scheme or a model which would apply everywhere in the world and everywhere in the internet. We have to accept that the world is not really compatible in every part. The world is, let's say, specialized, fragmented, everywhere you want to use, which is fashionable. But we have to admit that a solution, whatever it is a political solution in each country or in each segment of the world. And if we don't debate on what we want as a society, we will just balance from one proposal to another indefinitely. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this. Arnold, you had some final comments, and then I think we can close the debate.
Yes, thank you. And I think also, as you said, one size does not fit all. So of course it must be. We also think that the different approaches, it must be allowed for different approaches, different parts of the world. So that of course is also true in general in a lot of cases. Just a quick comment to the gentleman of filtering and blocking and blocking access to images of sexual abuse of children is still allowed under the new regulation in Europe. So that will continue to our law enforcement will continue to do that. So that is not constraining that activity. Just a quick comment on the zero rating. I'll not use too much time, but I think the BEREC guidelines are discussing a little bit on clear-cut cases, which is not allowed under the regulation. But I think that was the most challenging part of the BEREC guidelines, and I think also will be the most challenging part for the regulators to assess cases of zero rating, and the guidelines have provided with 5-6 criteria to assess whether a certain practice is allowed or not. So, but I think that is the most difficult part, and I think that is also true that you said that as the regulators we have a lot of issues to deal with. So of course this is also adding up to put resources into this area as well. So of course we would also not like to regulate too much. If the market can also provide solutions for a lot of issues, then that's also a very good thing. So we really hope that we will not have too many complicated cases, but I think there will be some cases in Europe, and that will be a challenging, and we will see how that develops. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And for those who are interested in the chapter number 8 of this book is dedicated to the new guidelines. It has been authored by Ornulf's colleague Frode Sorensen. I think what is emerging clearly is that a lot of more accurate and in-depth debate is needed. Those are the questions we are discussing here are not clear-cut questions. There is no silver bullet. It is necessary to have public debate on this. The reason of this report is to inform people and policymakers. It is necessary to have also some political vision, as Louis Pouzon was reminding us, and to take some steps in a direction or another, because we want to pursue a specific vision, and that vision, I think we all agree, should be in the public interest. So I would really like to thank you for the excellent comments, presentation, for particularly the audience. You have had very good comments, interactions, and thanks a lot. And I hope I will see you next year at the next meeting. Thank you.